Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Super excited to have you with us here today. So welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast, where every week I sit down with VCs, CEOs, and security executives. We have this really honest conversation about how to navigate the infinite game of cybersecurity. And welcome to a very special edition, so Friday morning editions of Insights. These are live conversations on the state of cybersecurity. So each week we have this frank, action-oriented conversation with about what's important in the world today and what are you going to do about it so you can protect what matters most. So today we've got a pretty cool agenda with you. As you see, I'm rolling solo today, and that is because James will be joining us later in the show. I know he's our favorite, and I am just simply here to take up some space. So we'll get today rolling. And of course, as always, this is a live stream, so please do drop your comments in either YouTube or LinkedIn, wherever you are viewing this. Interact, ask your questions, and let us know what you think and your thoughts and your opinions are. The point here is to foster a conversation. Nobody can win at cybersecurity alone. Our goal is just to play at the highest levels, and we can't do that without a community. So with that, pioneering solutions, transformational technology, and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Connor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. So the first thing I want to dive in today is the fact that China is now requiring that we do these security health checks before listing on the US stock exchanges. So this has been pretty widely reported. There's no crazy little secrets here. But one of the things that I found really interesting about this was that when you think about we think about security here in the US, right? We have this really clear distinction between what is personal security or national security. And when we have conversations and we see a document come out from DC and they're like, hey, this is important for national security. There's this understanding that there's this bedrock, this foundation underneath, which is national security things. But it's separate from individual protections, liberties, and securities, which are up at the kind of sit above that infrastructure. And so we have consumer data privacy laws, we have breach notifications, we have these other laws around cybersecurity, but they're really protected around the consumer. And so while there's a Venn diagram there and there is overlap, there's definitely two different lenses on it. So we hear national security, we often think of critical infrastructure, our banking environment. We think of individuals who wish to do harm through terrorism or such. And then we have individual security, which is about privacy and consumer protections and making sure that when you put your credit card somewhere online, no one's going to steal it. And if they do, there are repercussions that protect you as the consumer. But one thing I wanted to highlight out of this information is coming out of China's decision is I'm not so sure that distinction exists, right? And I'm not an expert on Chinese foreign politics. But what I do have this sense of just kind of reading a little bit more around this is that when they put forward a state sentence that says, if you're going to be a tech company that has more than 1 million users, which is like the lowest possible bar. Everyone who's a tech company trips over that. And you want to file as go public in the United States, you have to make sure that you've got good cyber hygiene. And the reason for this is for national protection but they kind of blur the two, national protection, individual protections. I really think the reason that China is doing this is an opportunity for them as the state to exert a bit of control, maybe a lot of control, over these companies that are getting external financial influence by being on a stock exchange listed in the US. So it's ways to maintain control. And I think really what they're trying to do here is ensure that when there's a data breach and a company is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and they have a data breach, there are laws, the SEC has an opinion on what happens when you do that. There are US laws and US security firms that are going to respond to deal with that breach event. Well, in doing so, the United States government would have an arm to influence and shape that company. And I think really what this is coming down to is it's less around protecting the personal privacy and the personal protections of the company, of the individuals and the consumers in China and in the and in the Far East. Really what it's about is ensuring that China gets to have another layer of control and influence over these companies, because if they were to get breached, if they were to go that, now there's another country, the US, who has an outsized influence on that company. So I really think that's the driving force for this. Again, I guess there's not much to a surprise there. I think what the other item to take away from this is how this will shape and influence the future going forward is one that it's called the looking here on Wikipedia, the Cyberspace Administration of China. That was it. Right. And so this is the one who got referenced. This is the organization that actually put out the documents. This is, they manage the Great Firewall of China and other cybersecurity technologies that are run by the state. They're the ones who put out this guidance. So what I see here is what's always been important to them is to the Chinese government has been this sense of control around digital infrastructure. This administration is just getting stronger, as as everyone on this show knows, like we're putting more and more inside these tech companies. Either so for inside of China, this is an arm that's going to get more and more powerful. I think it's something to watch. I don't really have an opinion on what's going to happen there. Definitely something to learn more about them. So one thing, that's one thing. This is them showing this administration, this function of the government, showing that they have teeth, that they will take action, and that just because you're a company and you've moved your data and your servers and you're all that, and you're like listed in the New York Stock Exchange, and maybe you're moving your tech infrastructure to using U.S. cloud services, that they can still have a means to have teeth into your company. So that's one. The second thing is, and this was actually something that was surfaced up in the Bloomberg narratives on this, that this may incentivize Chinese companies not to list in the New York Stock Exchange, not to list on the US exchanges, but list on the Hong Kong exchanges and do trade there, which on an international stage, the US is still probably a higher tier, but still top tier place to list your company. But really what that does is by going into the Hong Kong exchange, China has a lot more influence there, right? So again, it's just making sure that there's these arms still get to reach around these companies. And I guess it really comes back to influence and control. They're certainly not the only country in the world who is prioritizing that, but this was a clear example of that. And it happened to be in our backyard and around cybersecurity. So while part of me is really excited that yes, there's a government agency encouraging companies to do security checkups and ensure there's proper cybersecurity hygiene, I don't think it's for all the right reasons, at least not from my perspective. So take it what it is, grain of salt. I think it's gonna be an interesting thing to see as it develops and plays out. But we've definitely beginning an interesting era. It's a really interesting one to see how cybersecurity is influencing financial markets. Okay, and let's just remind everyone, as we are going live, we are going live both on YouTube and LinkedIn. If you've got comments, if you're watching, if you're listening, go drop me your thoughts. You can also say just good morning, Connor. It is nice to have a cup of coffee with you. So let's dive into item number 2. And this is SolarWinds. Now, we've all heard about SolarWinds for quite some time now. What I want to set the stage here. SolarWinds to me is not about SolarWinds. It's an important company. It's got arms into lots of other places. Sorry. But what makes SolarWinds so powerful is it really hit home software supply chains. And where most people would have said, yeah, that's part of my risk register. Yeah, that's part of my landscape I have to deal with, but I'm just going to deal with first party stuff, right? What's running in, what's the code that we've created? What is the systems that we're deploying? And we're just going to trust that the outside vendor is okay. Don't worry, we have a vendor management program where we're good to go. Our contracts look right. Well, what this is showing us is that you may have all the right legal language inside your contracts, but if you're allowing a third party to have administrative access into your environment, they've effectively become an extension of your first party, right? They are a part of you, and you have to have the same level of diligence and care. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, I would say, and they should be part of your zero trust model, right? We know that zero trust is more than just throwing up lots of buzzwords. Zero trust is the ability to say that if you're going to introduce change or have a connection or have an influence in whatever means that is inside the technical environment, that connection is authenticated, that connection is then authorized to do what it needs to do, but nothing more. And then there are guards, should you get outside those boundaries, where you can have a detection response functionality to shore that up. So in this case, if you have a monitoring service which has administrative access and it goes rogue, what are you going to do about it? What I find so interesting about, first thing about SolarWinds, though, is we actually saw this exact thing get exploited back in, I'm going off of memory here, when we had the huge ransomware event that went through the Ukraine, and the one that is profiled in the book Sandworm by Andy Green. 1 second. Ukraine. It's gonna drive me nuts. It exploited the Eternal Blue exploit is what it was leveraging, and for the NotPetya. Jesus. Okay. Yes, when NotPetya hit, right, and we saw that which has been attributed to Russia infiltrating the Ukraine tax software, using this exact same thing, right? They went to an update server, they dropped the ransomware went through, and they it ransomed the country of the Ukraine, and of course had this huge, devastating knock-on effect for the entire world. Took out hospitals, lost billions of dollars. There's still cargo sitting in dockers, in the docks on the in New Jersey, and they don't know who it belongs to or where it went to because we've lost the records for that incredible impact. But how did that whole thing take place? Supply chain, right? Everybody was using this tax software, which was doing an auto update feature, which is a cool thing, right? You get all your security patches auto updated. But once you use it as a vehicle to deploy ransomware, you have a catastrophe. And same here. Again, we attribute Russia to the attack with SolarWinds, getting in, and they adjust the auto update features, and now here we are. So, okay, so we've all heard about this. We've all talked about it. We're like, yeah, supply chains are really important. Here's what I like that's recently come out. Oh, and the reason I brought up SolarWinds for this week is because there's a new critical 0 day. So yay for that. So the Hacker News reported that there's not the core Orion stuff that that was the headline a few months ago, but another software product that they offer, which is this ServeView, which is centered around being an FTP, SFTP server. Going through, Microsoft found that those vulnerability, critical day, it was being exploited. And once exploited, the attacker could install programs, view data, change, run, full admin. So it's again, nothing we haven't seen here before, but here's the glimmer of hope. Here's the insight. Here's the thing I want you to take away from this whole conversation I'm having about SolarWinds here and these other breaches that we have. It's this, and Google security team to the win. I love it. Who doesn't love a little bit of salsa with their breakfast burritos? So check this out. So Google has released salsa frameworks. This was actually back in June, so it's about a month old, which I know is about an eternity in our industry. But what I really liked about this was here is a framework for getting your arms around software supply chain security. And it's well worth the read. Maybe I'll put some links in the comments here on the LinkedIn side. And if you're on YouTube, pop over to our LinkedIn. Please take a moment to follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to the page as well, so you can get notified every time we go live. But what I liked about this here was, if you kind of go down it, it gives you really simple ways to kind of just get your head and hands around supply chain integrity. What does it mean to have a supply chain, and where are the points that someone could attack it? Where are the weak points in that? Where can people introduce malicious code or subvert good code? And so they go through all the kind of threats and stuff like that. So, and then we move into, and here's the framework. What level, 1 through 4, where are you going to be? Everything from like you have control over your source code to you are ensuring there's nothing malicious in your third-party dependencies, making sure that your build process is smooth so that when your team is building and running software and deploying into production, that beginning to end is good to go. And there's integrity there. You can extrapolate this to kind of handle the more commercial side, which is the SolarWinds and stuff. But again, it's still not whole space around software supply chains. While this one's more focused on the dev cycle and software SDLC, read it. Even if that's not your core risk profile that you're managing in your company today, right? Maybe you're just only using COTS, commercial off-the-shelf technology. It's still worth the read to get your head around, here it is, and take the best parts of this and apply it over there. Highly recommend the read, work through it. It's not that long, very accessible, but a great document and a framework I do really hope takes off in our industry, because this is a problem that's getting worse, not better. And it's getting worse not because we're doing something different. It's getting worse because we haven't been paying attention to it, right? It's like we've always held this risk. We've had this risk since the Target breach, which kicked off this whole modern era of tech breaches. When someone broke into the HVAC system at Target, but the HVAC system was on the same network as the payment systems with the POS devices. And they went, they got in, they loaded up their malware, and off they went. That was Target, followed by Home Depot, followed by this other, and it's like this whole modern era of companies getting breached and really coming to their own started with all that. And it came in through a third party. Same thing with software supply chains, coming in with a third party. Cool. So we're not doing something different. We've always had this risk. We're just realizing this risk finally. It's just kind of coming to a forefront because we've just neglected it for so long, right? We've been dealing with, as an industry, other things. We focus on ransomware, right? You look at every news headline for the past 12 months, it's been ransomware, ransomware, ransomware. Why? Because it's taking down hospitals, because it's taking down election systems. It was a top of mind risk, and it still is a top of mind risk. Just, we haven't unfortunately burnt this one down. We've just raised up another one. So ransomware still should be your top 5, but so should this, because this is a mechanism into which you can have a devastating impact. One of it could be ransomware, the other could be data theft, the others, you can have other ones, but this is the vehicle that can be exploited. This is an attack vector where the end result might be these ransomware events and such that you want to protect against. Cool. Okay, let me just flip over to the chat here and see who we've got coming in. Want to take a moment. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so it looks like it is just got a few people jumping in. So just good morning to all those who are listening in. There we go. And I'm just gonna, if you are watching or listening, please say good morning on LinkedIn. There we go. Cool. So now let's flip to our next topic here. ReEvil, the ransomware evil group out of Russia. Does anybody know what happened to them? So let's take a step back here for a second. So there's a wonderful write-up put out by Palo Alto Unit42. I'm big fans of Unit42. I like them a lot. They do a lot of good lot of good write-ups, a lot of good intelligence. And one of the things I do like about them, besides their amazing graphics team, is their ability to just make these things so very accessible. I love it because when I put together executive decks, I can just run over there and be like, yep, that sounds good. That sounds good. That sounds good. Right. And they can help shape and influence some of those conversations. But so even if you're not the most technical security leader, this is definitely a blog to subscribe to. They have really good intelligence sources. And as someone who has built and run threat intelligence teams that, protected a company that was part of the Department of Homeland Security infrastructure, threat intelligence is a difficult topic to do well. So when you get out of the spooky side of it and you get into the commercial side of it, and you want to make it accessible, it's actually quite a hard translation language. It's a hard thing to translate. But Unit42 does a really good job, and they do really do a good job on their blogs. So definitely giving them some love here today. So go see that if you want to get a quick recap of what REvil is all about. It stands for Ransomware Evil Group, or Ransomware Evil, and then we just tacked on the group. Widely known, attributed to be hosted and coming out of Russia. Unclear if it's directly state-sponsored. And there was lots of speculation around this, but effectively what they were doing is they were not only themselves running some campaigns, but they were building this ransomware as a software service. So they were this nexus of all these ransomware events, and they were the ones who were, they would build an infrastructure, they would write the code, you would as an adversary, you'd come as a customer, you'd be like, hey, I'm not that technical as a bad guy, but I want to, get into this ransomware market. Here's my credit card. And this whole economy around ransomware as a service just booming going forward. Anyway, one of the services that they would do is they would do ransomware negotiations on your behalf. So if you're organized crime and you get that phishing email and you get it in there and you ransom up the place, the company who's been ransomed would call the number or start the communications with the ransom note, and then go to the REvil, they do the negotiations, and everyone gets a cut. Lovely, lovely little business model. Anyway, so check it out, really good thing. But as we know, when you start to take down critical infrastructure inside the United States, you will get the attention of the president. And that's the big thing that's happened recently. A couple weeks ago, Biden sat down with Putin, and it was, pretty widely reported that he was like, that Biden had told Putin, you need to get yourself involved and shut down this ransomware activities happening in your country, or else we're going to do it for us, or else we're going to do it as the US. And that was that. And like a week later, they disappeared. So nobody really knows, excuse me, that's not a true statement. It is not publicly and widely reported who the actors were that took down the REvil group. What it is speculated is that they didn't shut down on their own accord. They could have. I mean, we don't know yet. But the behavior of when most ransomware groups shut down is that they will just throw their hands up in the air when it gets too hot, and they actually publish the decryption keys on their website and then run off into the sunset. Here, they didn't do that. They just disappeared. Like the site came down. There was no more. All active negotiations just stopped. There's no decryption keys. So they're gone. I'm sure more will come to light in the coming weeks about this and who did it. And if anyone still has those decryption keys for all the hundreds of companies that are still locked up and the tens of thousands of machines that are still ransomed. So we'll see. Basically, it's fascinating to watch. It's just like everyone's waiting at the edge of their seats to see what happens next. But fundamentally, we as leaders of security, this is just drama. That's what at the moment. If you wanted to bring your problem space back down to the company you're here to protect and defend, it's all about preventing that ransomware in the first place. Right endpoint detection controls, making sure. Like that's the crazy thing about like the REvil group. Like how are they getting in? Phishing. How are they moving laterally? Compromised credentials. How are they locking companies up? Well, companies don't have good endpoint or like they don't have a good EDR in place. Basics. You could go through the CIS 20 and just That's like your first 3 or 4 of the control families right there. It's like if you just did those, you would have just protected yourself against ransomware. They don't have backups of their data. That's the responsive capability that these companies don't have. So is it hard to implement good technology hygiene? Yeah, if it was easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It is hard. Is it worth the fight? Is it worth going in and doing what we need to do every single day? Absolutely. Absolutely. So when it comes to ransomware, I often think that as a security leader, like it's hard to tackle all of these problems all the time. So just gauge yourself in your environment and say like, where can I get the most momentum the quickest to defend against this? So you might find that there's an openness inside the organization to go handle the phishing problem. Cool. Go get your layer on those controls up front to kind of prevent the phishing from coming in. You may also find, okay, you've got an Okta or some other identity service and some good understanding of why that's important. Cool. Focus, and just get those identity access management programs strong, get your privileged access under control, move people to two-factor authentication, do step-up authentication for privileged activity. Like that's an incredible win there to do that. Or you may not have appetite there, but you do have an endpoint detection and response budget and it's coming up for renewal time and you know you've been running with a subpar technology and it's time to upgrade, make the minor leap and move to a platform like a CrowdStrike or a Palo Alto XDR or another one of these top players. And if all else fails and you can't get traction there, run to your backups. Very few people are going to push back on that. Make sure you got good backups. Do you have a DR plan? Do you have the ability to say, if we lost this critical data, do we know how long it would take us to get back up online? You don't have to go fancy. Just make sure you have the data because nobody cares what your RTO is when you're in the firestorm. They just want to know that you have the data and you're working to get it back up, right? So, that was the ransomware thing. I think it's fascinating to see that and again, I think my big excitement with this news that I'm holding on for right now is I want to see how this went down, because I think it's going to speak volumes to the future of politics and where cybersecurity is playing in this. So I suppose if there's been one theme today, it's that cybersecurity is no longer a technology problem. It is an arm of influence inside government agendas. Whether if it's organizations like the Chinese government trying to ensure control over and make sure they shape their companies such that a breach doesn't lead to another nation having undue control over the data or the company or one of their companies. Or if it's here, where Biden and Putin having a heartfelt conversation on what they're going to do about the evil group. We'll see what comes out of it. But this is going to, this is good. I'm really glad that cybersecurity is a forefront topic conversation. Let's just make sure we just don't politicize, right? Hygiene is hygiene. We don't politicize washing our hands, but we saw with COVID, we did start to politicize other things like keeping people safe and keep people healthy. So with cybersecurity, we're in danger of now moving into that space where historically we could have just said, hey, it's just hygiene, it's washing our hands. And everyone would be like, yep, that makes sense. Well, that's the bucket it's into. If we start to get political about it, we're going to get divided in our control, our capabilities to be good at our job is going to get diminished. So that's what I'm hoping we avoid here. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about, there was this other thing that came up, and I wasn't sure if I want to bring it on the call today, on the chat today, but I think I will. So there was this article put out on the Hill, which got some interesting attention. So this is an older article. It's not new. And it was May that this was published, mid-May. What the author of this piece is arguing for is we in the cybersecurity community try and say, hey, let's just do good practices or best practices and implement those across the board. He goes here and makes some really good comments around the fact that our best practices aren't good enough. we're just not moving the needle far enough to have a material impact on preventing attacks like we see with the Colonial Pipeline. The author here, Alan Gwynn, got a lot of flack on Twitter and other social posts for this article because he went as far as to say, like, just because these people with fancy titles like CISSP and other things like that, we shouldn't just trust them outright, and like they're not good enough, and we need to have kind of had an unfavorable view on a lot of security professionals, and was like, we need to chuck them all. And the sentiment that like most people reading this came away with is like, okay, he's advocating that we throw away all of our practice and start over again. Like, I don't think he explicitly went there in this article. I don't think most people would argue that that's a sound practice either. But he did call out a few things which I liked, which was what we're doing is not good enough. What we're doing is we're not really protecting the way we think we are. And if we keep showing these beautiful slides on these PowerPoint decks that say, here's your risk, you were a 5 and you're now a 3, or here is your top vulnerabilities and we patched the top 5. I mean, it's like, we want to celebrate our wins and the hard work it takes to just do the foundational and the basic stuff in cybersecurity. I mean, most people have teams that are understaffed. They have budgets that are inappropriately small. So he's coming here and saying, like, look, we're trying to like say that we're doing all these things. We have this, this risk management program. We have all these things, and we're okay. We're inside our risk tolerance. But realistically, like when it hits the fan, like nobody cares about any of that stuff. We need to change how we do what we do, so that we're more leaning into solving the problems, not just reporting out the problems, not just managing the risk of the problem. And there's a sentiment that I really agree with. I really sit with. I think we need to embrace innovation in our technology stack faster and sooner. We need to be recognizing the devastating impacts that a cyber attack can have on a company. I think it's inappropriate to say that like a cyber attack will destroy the company, take them out of business, unless that's a true risk. Then you can prove that on paper. What we could talk about more of is here are the risks that we have. Here are the changes we're going to make and how the company will operate differently to improve our resiliency to a cyber attack. And we do need to change our practice around it. So if you're looking at a framework today, whether it's the ISO 27001, the NIST 153, it's the whichever one, the NIST cybersecurity framework, whatever's important to you, and you're looking at all these, your control framework, and you see I have a whole bunch in the detection and response side of the house, and not enough on the protection side, the preventing of the problem, then you need to refocus and reshift. Understanding your problems, understanding your risk in your environment is a good step one, but it's not the end of the story. Like, you have to arrive there and then leapfrog the hell out of there into the let's go solve the problem. Let's go fix the problem. The ability to say, we have a risk called ransomware, and so we're doing the backup. So just was saying it was a good idea a second ago. But if that's where your story stops, that's the problem. Your story needs to stop when you've got the whole kill chain under wraps and you've really categorically solved a problem. You've gone after ransomware and you've categorically made impacts in protection, detection, response, recovery, and you've got that whole thing down. Right? At that point, you've managed the problem. Not when you've identified it, but when you've implemented the controls along the entire kill chain for that class of problem, then I say, cool, good job. You've got it under wraps. Then you reduce that risk score, or however it is that you're measuring risk in your environment. Well worth the read. This article definitely caused a lot of conversation in cybersecurity space community. I would encourage everyone to take a tempered view on reading it, and remember, we're all on the same team here. We're all on the same side of the wire, and that when someone has a dissenting opinion and they get really, really frustrated and they publish online, says throw the baby out with the bathwater, Our job as the rest of the community is not to go bash them, but to give them some feedback and some alternate opinions and maybe soften the perspective and bring a different viewpoint here, like we just did today. So, but I really like the conversation. Okay, so these were the items I want to chat about today. One sec. I have a little treat for you, which I'm hoping you can all enjoy in a moment. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to pop over to the folks on our LinkedIn community and see how we're doing there. Definitely got some love over there. If anyone wants to say good morning on the comment section, you're certainly welcome to. And I am waiting for my better half to show up here. Okay. So I'm going to go off script a little bit here while I'm waiting for my friend to show up. Let's talk about incident response for a second. Incident response is absolutely my favorite part. Like everyone comes to security through a different path. Some people were software engineers. Other people are great at cloud configuration and got into security space, network security. I came up on the blue team side, detection response, incident breach response, that detective response controls. That's me. That's my jam. So when I listen to companies today, I find that there isn't much of there isn't the right time and type and tone of conversation happening about incident response. And so now that I'm not going to be the only one speaking today, and my better half is just showing up, let me bring James, and we're going to put a pin in that incident breach response conversation for another day. Welcome, James. You made it.
Glad to be on, man. Holy, what a morning. Thanks for letting me join a little late here. A lot late.
Dude, I'm really happy to have you, James. And just for the thousands of people listening in today, we got James here, who is the founder and author on BetterAppSec community. So make sure to jump over to betterappsec.com and follow him there. Incredible stuff on I was going to say the red team side, but really it's the entire AppSec lifecycle. And so we wanted to save this special piece, this last piece here, bug bounties, for when you got here. So thanks for jumping on, James.
Yeah. So I don't know if folks follow the TLDR sec newsletter, but I would strongly encourage you to do so. It's definitely a really well put together one. Clint Gibler, is the author of that, and really great content he puts out every single week. I read it top to bottom, and one of the things that came up in his latest newsletter yesterday was the chapter 2 of this bug bounty kind of coalition, so to speak. That these folks, I'll probably pronounce like 5 of these names wrong, and there's only 5 on here, but Sean Porras, Jonathan Kuskos, Joshua Dembling, Katie Tremblay, Nobe, Dena Schick, and Christopher Robinson. They wrote the chapter 2 of this really well put together piece on whether or not like bug bounty is appropriate, and if it is, like, what are the mechanisms and what are the key things that you should consider when starting a bug bounty. And I really just wanted to call that out today. One, to kind of plug the TLDR sec newsletter, and two, this amazing piece for bug bounty. So the community of interest is what it's called, and really, like, I think the kind of key highlights from the article was really establishing early on, right, like the buy-in from the company, and that really kind of applies universally to a lot of things, right? Like anything, get buy-in early on, and I want to say, like, the in order to get the buy-in, right? Like, okay, yes, we have people out there that want to take advantage of our websites. They're going to do it regardless. Let's give them a means to do that and be rewarded for finding things that are wrong, right? And I think, like, principally that probably would resonate with a lot of people, especially in light of a lot of the things that you were talking about earlier in your program. And what comes next, right? Like, great, you get the buy-in. Well, then what? Right? What's the budget? Like, how do you train people? When do you start to consider other things in place? Maybe you have a vulnerability disclosure program today. How do you augment that or complement it? So check out this chapter 2 on the community interested for bug bounty. Really fabulous piece, and well done to the group that put it together. I'm definitely going to be using this as an artifact in future, security endeavors. I kind of wanted to really just make sure that folks were made aware of this, and bug bounty isn't for everyone, right? The last note here is maybe you don't need it. Maybe you just need a vulnerability disclosure program. But I think that this really starts to address, like, whether or not you truly do need it or not. And I think at the end of the day, right, like, it's easy to it's easy to convince yourself one way or another of almost anything, but to you kind of have that kind of consensus from like peers and other folks out in industry, like, well, what are you doing? What are you seeing? Right. And have that, like, kind of singular perspective on the matter, but singular in the sense of, like, you've kind of come to a single perspective, but it's been influenced by many perspectives in order to get there. So I'll leave it there.
So the thing I wanted to call out, because I love this article you put in here, like, this is, so I don't subscribe to the newsletter. So when we get done here, I'm going to go subscribe to the newsletter. So my fault for missing this training for a while. Bug bounty program. What I liked about what they call out here is, big thing is how to do it well. And so how to consider if you need it, where it lives in the life cycle, and then what do you do? Like, how do you do this where you actually are getting the value out of it? This was I think it was here. Yeah, a couple of things. This is the one I liked a lot. Get a foundational vulnerability disclosure place first. See, it's like kind of like testing the waters. That's your MVP. Can you get the infrastructure set up so that when someone reports a vulnerability, you know how to handle it, triage it, move it through the process, and go through it? I really like the fact that there was this argument around staffing and staff costs. I thought that was a good position on it. We know it's easy to say, well, we're going to have different perspectives and people are hammering on it all day long, and so we're going to see different stuff. But if you think about it in the perspective of, we're just not able to hire and staff our AppSec team completely, so this is actually a cheaper staffing model. And looking at it from that perspective, if you look at the team of, like, outputs, like, they find vulnerabilities and we go fix them, and hiring people costs this much. Well, for a tenth of that amount, we can have a pool, and we can also probably get like a quarter of those outputs, but, like, the ROI is still there. So I like that kind of thinking about it too.
Well, I just want to sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add a counterpoint, well, not really a counterpoint, but an additional point to what you just said, right? So yes, like, what does it cost to operationalize this thing? But I think the big thing for me, right, when it comes to operationalizing a bug bounty program, that's happening, like, in the later stage of the development lifecycle. It's like, code is out there, and people have the ability to go look at production assets, right? So then you might want to think about opening up some sort of bug bounty specific program that gets, like, iteration, an iteration before production, or I guess after the newer code, right, that gets released to that program before it goes out. But then you get into like timing, right? Like, well, then you're kind of beholden to when people are available to go look at it. So, while bug bounty is a great way to validate and find on a continuous basis security flaws, it shouldn't be your primary way that you
Right.
get like security vulnerabilities found in your environment. It's part of a broader mosaic of like what would make a great security program, right? Like it's something that you want to have on. I think they put it as like belt and suspenders, right? You want to have it on, yeah, like you want to have it on there as kind of like bringing the full end to end validation that yes, like we're constantly looking for vulnerabilities from start to finish, and we have those mechanisms in place in order to be alerted and be made aware of vulnerabilities, no matter where that code lives in the life cycle.
It's effectively the equivalent of like when you run your vulnerability scanners on your production assets. You're saying we've already released it; it's already out there. It can already be exploitable. We're just trying to figure out, did we miss something during the release cycle? And I like that idea too. Is the pipeline of checks is definitely on the far right because it's already released by the time the researchers are looking at it. So,
well, you also have controls in place, right? At that point, right? If it's in production, right, you have controls that these folks are going to need to, like real world attackers, need to circumvent and get around. And you might not have those controls in a development or a staging environment or QA environment, or they might be a little bit looser or more liberal. Parity between environments. I don't think I've ever seen like one-to-one.
What? No, everyone has great parity between their staging and dev. 100% control deployment across all environments. Yeah.
Listen, I've never seen it. Maybe you have. You live in a utopia, and
Yeah,
I want to join you there one day. We'll drink from the fountain of youth, and all my hair will turn back to a single color.
Awesome. Well, I think with that we will leave it. Everyone, thank you so much for James. Thanks so much for your conversation, jumping in today. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And for everyone who's listening in today, please take a moment to jump over to either wherever you're consuming this, whether it's LinkedIn, follow us there, or if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and check us out there. So we're going to do this every Friday morning going forward. We'll be doing a live session. And then, of course, we'll have our weekly podcasts, and they will start arriving again in early August. So, yeah, thanks to everyone. Until next week, I'll see you on LinkedIn.